Hey y'all, it's Dawn, and I'm so glad you're back. I've got another fun, budget-friendly DIY video for you today. I used 3 Dollar Tree mini blocks from the Crafter Square and painted them with white chalk paint. I painted all 6 sides of the blocks. Next, I used my drill and put holes in the center of each of the blocks. This one block wanted to be a pain, so I used my weeding tool to remove the excess wood from the center of it. Once the blocks were ready, I strung them along with some Dollar Tree red beads onto some cotton string. The holes were small, so I added a piece of painter's tape to the end of the string to make it a little bit easier. I tied a simple knot at both ends to hold the beads and blocks on the string. I used my Cricut and cut out 4 sets of USA and applied the letters to the blocks. The font I used was Beauty Display from dafont.com. It's a free font if you want to download it. And when I was finished, I had the perfect little bead set for a patriotic themed tiara tray. I think it turned out so stinking adorable. Let me know what you think in the comments. I found this little tag in my stash and painted both sides of it with white chalk paint. If you've been following me, you know I've been cleaning out my stash since the first of the year, and my craft building is still full. Do you have more stash than you know what to do with? Let me know in the comments. I decided to use these Dollar Tree beads and make a cute little garland for my patriotic tiara tray. Some of the beads had leftover wood shavings in the holes. I used my weeding tool to remove the shavings. I continued stringing the beads until I was happy with the length. I attached the little white tag at the end and tied a knot to hold it on. And then tied a simple knot at the other end. I created this cut file and attached it to the tag. And look at how darling. And just look at how stinking adorable. I found this barn in my stash. I think I got it from Dollar Tree, but it could have been Dollar General. I also had this scrapbook paper in my stash. I placed the barn on the scrapbook paper and traced it with a pencil, and then cut it out. Using a scraper, I went around the edges of the barn roof and then cut it down just a little. I Mod Podged the paper to the barn and cut off the excess with an X-Acto knife. Once the Mod Podge had dried, I used a fingernail file to remove the excess from around the barn. This is the best way I have found to get a clean look. I applied another layer of Mod Podge to seal the paper. While waiting for the Mod Podge to dry, I created this cut file in Design Space and cut it out. I applied it to the front of the barn. I didn't really like the difference in the red on the barn and the red on the paper. I used some antiquing wax to darken up the barn just a little. The wax is still a little wet, but just look at how stinking cute. For this project, I used 3 of these frames from Michaels and painted them in patriotic colors. I created and applied these vinyl stencils to each of the frames. On the red frame, I applied these stripes. On the white frame, I applied an ampersand. And on the blue, I applied some stars. I applied Mod Podge to each of the frames to seal them so I would get crisp lines. I used some black stencil paint on the white frame with the ampersand. And then white stencil paint on the red and blue frames for the stars and the stripes. I removed the stencils for each of the frames. And I am just amazed at how these turned out. I love them, and they were so simple. Let me know what you think in the comments. I used 6 of the new to my Dollar Tree anyway, marshmallow shaped blocks for the next DIY. I hot glued the blocks together and painted them with white chalk paint. And where, oh where, did that footage go? Using a small paintbrush, I painted red stripes on 5 of the blocks. I know I'm not a good freehand painter, but I couldn't figure out any other way to paint the blocks. When I was done, I think this turned out perfect, paint job and all. Once I had the stripes, I painted one block with blue acrylic paint. I had to use the acrylic paint because I couldn't find the blue chalk paint. Once the paint was dry, I used a stencil to apply little stars to the blue section. And then scuffed it up with 220 grit sandpaper. I sealed the piece with some matte Mod Podge and just look at how stinking cute this American flag turned out. I think it is so adorable. I decided to use some solo wood flowers from my stash for this DIY. I added blue and red paint to 2 plastic cups and then water to each and mixed. I stained the first flower with the red paint and a small paintbrush. I made sure I stained the inside and the outside of the flower. I didn't want any of the natural wood showing. To me, the flower looked more pink than red. I used paint with a little water mixed in and painted over the flower again. I probably should have added more of the red paint to the water in the cup. The smaller flower fit in the cup of water and blue paint. I dipped it in and played with it to make sure all the petals were covered. For the stems of the flowers, I used some Dollar Tree skewers and cut them down so they were different heights. I placed the stem into the back center of each bloom and then arranged them in my vase, adding other faux greenery and florals with it. And when I was finished, I had this adorable little patriotic floral arrangement. I found this mirror in my stash and had an idea to make a tray with it. I started by cleaning it with Awesome Cleaner and realized how dirty it actually was. So I decided to wash it in the sink. Once it was cleaned and dry, I took it outside and spray painted it with flat black spray paint. While I waited for the paint to dry, I Mod Podged this Dollar Tree calendar page to the mirror. I bet I'm the only crafter that still has a 2021 calendar they have barely used. I covered the mirror with Mod Podge and then laid the calendar on top of it. I turned it over and used an X-Acto knife to cut off the part that was hanging over the sides. I guess you'd call it the excess. I couldn't remember the word. I did have some wrinkles in the paper, but I thought it would give the piece a little character. Next, I added a layer of hard coat Mod Podge to protect the paper. Now that the black paint was dry, I painted the entire frame, front and sides, with white chalk paint. I wanted the piece to be clean looking, so it did take several coats of the white. And let me tell you, getting into all the nooks and crannies was time consuming. But if you ask me, it was well worth it. To protect and seal the frame, I used Jolie finishing wax. I use the wax on about 90% of my furniture projects, and I just love it. You can find it in my Amazon store, and I highly recommend this wax for any of your projects. I put a little wax on an old t-shirt and rubbed it all over the frame. I flipped it over and replaced the mirror, attached the existing screws, and added a little hot glue around the edges to make sure the back was attached. I decided that I wanted the tray raised a little, so I used these dowel caps, also from my Amazon store, and stained them with some gel stain. Once the stain was dry, I used Gorilla Glue and hot glue to attach the feet to the tray. And just look at how high-end this tacky plastic frame turned out. I am in love with it. I had this half of a shutter in my stash. I cleaned it up and let it dry. I then sprayed it with flat white spray paint. Once the white paint was dry, I taped off a section with painter's tape and painted that part with blue chalk paint. And the footage of me doing that was so bad, I decided not to show it. The angle was terrible, and it made my eyes hurt trying to edit the video. I then used painter's tape to create stripes along the shutter. And let me tell you, this did take a while to do, and getting the stripes straight was a real pain. But after a while, I finally got it the way I wanted. I painted the stripes with red chalk paint. I wasn't worried about it being perfect because I knew I was going to distress it. and make it look old and beautiful. After everything was dry and distressed, I used a paint marker to draw a star in the blue section of the shutter. And then came back in with white chalk paint to fill in the star. I used my heat gun to dry the paint and held it close to the star because I wanted some crackling in it. I then used a piece of sandpaper and distressed the star and the blue paint. I absolutely love how this old shutter turned out. Let me know what you think in the comments. Please take a second to like this video and leave me a comment. This really helps my channel to grow so others just like yourself can find me. If you just found me, I hope you will join our little family by hitting the subscribe button. If you are already part of the family, thank you so much for your love and support. Y'all are the absolute best. Check out my new Amazon store for craft supply and farmhouse home decor recommendations. All the products I use from Amazon in my videos can be found there. Until next time, happy crafting!